Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 716, Preparing an Ambush. Chapter 716, Preparing an Ambush. Han Li smiled and confidently said, "No matter. Let us first see how it goes. If it doesn't succeed, we can make our escape. With me around, I'll be able to bring you out regardless of the restrictions on your body." After studying at Han Li for a while, she seemed to understand that there was no changing his mind. She bit her lips and said, "Fine. Although I don't know how vast your abilities are, you should be somewhat skilled given your confidence. But there is no need for you to take the initiative to go find her. My senior martial sister's residence is layered with restrictions, so I'll draw her here instead. Afterwards, we'll be able to draw assistance from the restrictions to capture her while her guard is down." After a brief moment of thought, Han Li smiled and said, "That method is truly more reliable. However, can you still use the restrictions on your cave residence? When I arrived, it appeared that the restrictions were shattered." Nangong Wn quickly replied, "No worries. Although a few of the surface restrictions have been shattered by my senior martial sister, there is still one very formidable hidden restriction that she has yet to discover. It can still be used." Han Li rubbed his chin and said, "Good. Since we can use that, I also have several spell formation tool sets. Although they aren't powerful, after they are placed, they will be able to provide a certain level of impedance." Having heard Han Li, Nangong Wn became more confident. "You have formation flags? All the better. We cannot delay. I will need half a day to remove the restrictions on my body and restore my magic power. You should start placing down the spell formations during that time." After a moment of thought, Han Li puzzlingly asked, "If we manage to restrain your senior martial sister, can't you take control of the Masked Moon sect? That way, we wouldn't have to flee." After a moment of surprise, Nangong Wn shook her head. "That won't be possible. Apart from our senior martial sister, there is one other nascent soul cultivator. Although my relationship with him is good, he certainly won't allow me to take the title of Grand Elder illegitimately. I also have no desire for a power struggle. I only want a peaceful place where I can quietly cultivate." Han Li shook his head and coldly smiled. "If that's the case, then leave it be. If this succeeds smoothly, you can follow me back to the Drifting Cloud sect. Even if the Nine Nations Union was stronger and we are heavily doted on Wei Lycan, he wouldn't dare to rashly offend the Heavenly Dao Alliance along with two nascent soul cultivators during an invasion of spell warriors." Soon after, he slapped the storage pouch at his waist and flipped his hand, summoning a pile of formation flags and formation plates. When Nangong Wn saw this, she faintly smiled and sat back down. With her eyes closed, she formed an odd incantation seal with her hands. A short moment later, her snow-white clothes began to emit a scarlet-red flame. It reached a meter tall and enveloped Nangong Wn. Han Li then set into motion. His body blurred and circled around the hall, placing down formation flags and plates all over the hall. Radiance of various colors briefly shone before sinking deep into the hall and disappearing from sight. Arranging the formations took little time, but in order for the spell formations to display as much power as possible, Han Li had the spell formations cover only the area of the hall. Additionally, he also placed the spell formations so that they would remain hidden unless they were meticulously searched for. These formation flags and plates were all something Han Li had refined during his time as a core formation stage cultivator. They lacked even the power to deal with core formation cultivators, let alone nascent soul cultivators. Han Li didn't have much hope for them. After placing down all the spell formations, he muttered to himself and suddenly swept his sleeve. A streak of white light shot out from his buff and flew a circle around Han Li before dropping down in front Han Li, revealing itself to be small white fox. Silvermoon beamed and said, "Master, are you not scared that you'll make Mistress Nangong jealous by summoning me?" Han Li raised his brows and glared at the small fox. "Humph! Who'd get jealous over an artifact spirit like you? I will be facing a mid-nascent soul stage cultivator soon, and I cannot allow her to flee. Although I have some restrictions assisting me, I will also need you to help. A mid-nascent soul cultivator is incomparable to an early nascent soul cultivator. It will be difficult to overcome her even while using all my power. Silver Moon swiftly replied, Master, how do you plan on having this servant assist you? Han Li took something out from his storage pouch and handed it over to Silver Moon. It's simple. Use this treasure during a suitable moment. You cannot allow her to escape. Silver Moon clasped the item with her claw and incredulously said, You're letting me use this? Han Li calmly said, Right. If you're controlling this item, you should be able to display even more of its might than I can. And I would consume magic power by using this item, so it'd be better to let you use it. Of course, you will only be able to use this for a short time. After all, artifact spirits aren't able to control other treasures for a long period of time. Silver Moon lowered her head and dejectedly said, Silver Moon understands. At the same time, she rubbed the object several times as if she were fond of it. When Han Li saw this, he felt his heart stir. After Silver Moon grasped this item, her entire body flickered with silver light and she disappeared into the ground. Afterwards, Han Li walked several circles around the hall, and suddenly raised his head to look at the ceiling with sudden inspiration. After muttering to himself for a moment, he tossed his spirit beast pouch into the air and summoned a large swarm of black-tainted gold devouring beetles. They revolved above him as a 3-meter wide cloud. Han Li took a deep breath and blew an azure mist onto the cloud. With his 2 hands in an incantation seal, he softly uttered an incantation, and the insect cloud buzzed for a moment before transforming into specks of starlight. The specks of light then floated up to the ceiling and disappeared with flickers of azure light, completely masking their aura. Han Li narrowed his eyes and stared at the ceiling for a moment more. Having sensed nothing obvious, he nodded his head in satisfaction. Having laid this all down, Han Li turned his gaze to Nangong Wen. At that moment, the flames on her body wandered and shifted until they took the shape of a round red disc that strangely pulsed with light. The changes in the flame also influenced the spiritual qi in the hall, causing it to grow restless. Han Li frowned at the sight. After some thought, he struck a nearby stone pillar with a spell seal and caused a layer of azure barrier to suddenly appear with Nangong Wen at its center. Soon, the spiritual qi around the hall returned to normal. When Han Li saw this, he smiled and extended his arm, summoning a straw chair into his grasp. He then casually took a seat across from Nangong Wen and silently stared at her. With such a good opportunity to glance at her captivating face, he naturally wanted to take a good look at the woman he yearned for many years. Not long after, Han Li became entranced and his expression grew lax. But soon, Han Li's figure abruptly disappeared without warning. The woman who had been spying from outside the hall was alarmed by this. Cursing inwardly, she immediately attempted to flee. But she was too slow as she heard Han Li's calm voice from behind her. Why are you spying on us? Are you not scared your martial ancestor will rebuke you? Not daring to turn her head, she stuttered, I wasn't spying. It was just that martial ancestor hasn't emerged after such a long time, so I grew worried. This was the yellow-robed woman who had led Han Li into the hall. At that moment, she already sensed a huge pressure appear behind her, compelling her to give her apprehensive explanation. With his hands behind his back, he stared at the young woman emotionlessly said, Oh, really? Since you only wished to take a look, why is it that you've hid yourself so thoroughly? You even used such a rare high-grade talisman as a concealing spirit talisman. How did a meager foundation establishment cultivator like you get your hands on that? In the young woman's alarm, Han Li coldly said, there is no need for any further explanation. You will obediently follow me back. Once your martial ancestor finishes, she will decide how to deal with you. Once the yellow-robed woman heard this, she grew fearful and instantly squeezed the talisman in her other hand. Her body flashed with yellow light and she shot down the corridor in an attempt to escape. Han Li coldly stared at her but made no move to pursue her. Once she traveled about 30 meters, a nearby wall suddenly spat a cloud of pink mist which enveloped her. The light surrounding the young woman's body scattered, and her body swayed several times before falling to the ground. In a flicker of yellow light, Silver Moon emerged from the wall and gracefully shook her tail several times before walking up to the young woman with a smile. Chapter 717. Ambush. Setting Sun Hall was the residence for the Great Elder for many successive generations of the Masked Moon sect. Not only was a spirit well placed there, but the hall was also heavily layered with restrictions. Apart from a few other elders, none were able to easily approach the hall without the permission of the Great Elder. At that moment, a streak of red light flew across the horizon. It revolved several times around Setting Sun Hall and was able to enter without obstruction. The red light passed through several layers of restrictions as if they weren't there, and entered a side room after taking a few turns. Inside the room was a woman of graceful beauty meditating on a prayer mat. Her skin seemed icily pale, and she appeared to be in her early 20s. Her body faintly emitted an icy chi. In the instant the red light appeared before the woman, she slowly opened her eyes and frowned. She beckoned to the red light and it then dropped down into the woman's hand in a fist-sized ball of red light. The icy woman stared at the flame and expressionlessly flipped her hand, extinguishing it. "What is that girl planning? Taking the initiative to see me? But since her tone is so gentle, I better have a look." In a swift and decisive manner, the woman quickly flew off in a streak of white light and instantly flew out of Setting Sun Hall. Not long after, the woman arrived in front of Nangong Wan's cave residence. She descended onto the ground and examined her surroundings. It appeared ordinary and the restrictions outside the cave residence were still damaged beyond use. Having noticed nothing strange, she walked towards the cave residence with confidence and struck the stone door with a white spell seal, opening it of its own accord. The pale woman then calmly walked in without a word. "I pay my respects to martial ancestor." A young, yellow-clothed woman that was standing behind the stone door immediately saluted the icy woman as soon as she appeared. The icy woman shot a casual glance at her and indifferently said, "It seems your cultivation has progressed since the last time I saw you. It seems you should have already taken those medicine pills I've given you." She then began to slowly walk deeper into the cave residence. The yellow-clothed woman lowered her head and quickly replied, "Many thanks for the medicine, martial ancestor. This disciple wouldn't have progressed so quickly without it." "It is good that you know. Has junior martial sister Nangong taken any strange actions in her cave residence?" "Nothing much," the young woman answered respectfully. "Apart from seeing a sect disciple today, she hasn't done anything else." "Your martial uncle Lan already told me about this from a sound transmission talisman. What gift did that disciple bring? Has he already left?" "That disciple was merely a low-grade steward in the sect. He already left a few hours ago." After martial ancestor Nangong received the gift, she actually seemed somewhat unhappy. The icy woman's expression stirred upon hearing this. "Oh, what kind of gift was it that made her unhappy?" The yellow-clothed woman further lowered her head and uttered each word with deliberation. It was simply a silver sword magic tool. Martial ancestor Nangong felt ill at ease upon seeing it. After pondering for a moment, the icy woman's face revealed a trace of astonishment and said, "It most likely came from a vagrant cultivator that junior martial sister Nangong had befriended while she was traveling. This isn't anything too strange. Martial ancestor's words are certainly true." When martial ancestor Nangong received the silver sword, she became pensive for a long while. Afterwards, she decided to send a voice transmission talisman to martial ancestor. "It is truly surprising that this was able to change her mind," the icy woman mused aloud. She then casually ordered, "In the future, continue to pay attention to junior martial sister Nangong's actions. With her restricted cultivation, the high-grade talisman I have should allow you to spy on her undetected. So long as you perform well in this task, I will compensate you with vast rewards." By the time that was said, the two had already arrived outside the main hall. "As you command, martial ancestor. Martial ancestor Nangong should be waiting for you in the hall ahead." The yellow-clothed woman spoke softly and led the way to the hall's entrance. The icy woman originally thought to be cautious out of habit and was about to examine her surroundings before entering the hall. However, when she arrived in front of the hall, she heard Nangong Wan's voice from within, "Senior Marshal Sister, come in. I've thought about the matter, and I am able to reluctantly agree, on one condition. You need to make a promise." Her voice sounded exceptionally calm. The icy woman was pleasantly surprised, and walked in without further thought. She spoke in a pleasant tone, "Junior Marshal Sister Nangong. It is great that you finally came to a realization. So long as you agree to marry the flowing mind sect's elder Wei, I will agree to any condition that you raise. With the assistance from Wei Wuya, our masked moon sect will soon flourish." After she spoke, the entire hall entered her view. Nangong Wen was sitting in a straw chair and was holding a crudely refined silver sword in her hand. It was held across her body and she was carefully examining it. It was as if she hadn't spoken just a moment ago. When the icy woman saw this, she stepped forward and walked into the large hall. A trace of bewilderment appeared on her face and she thought to ask Nangong Wen something more, but suddenly, her expression abruptly changed and her arm shot backwards at the speed of lightning. She shot 5-inch-long sword lights from her fingers towards where the yellow-clothed woman was standing. When the yellow-clothed woman faced this attack, a strange smile suddenly appeared on her face. The woman's body suddenly sunk into the stone in a flash of yellow light, leaving only tatters of her yellow clothes behind. She immediately shot towards the hall with her body clad in light upon seeing this fantastical earth evasion technique. But once she made her way to the exit, she heard a whistle approaching her. A 10-meter-long azure sword fiercely shot towards her in an attempt to cleave her in half. Her expression vastly changed. With a sudden flick of her fingers, 10-foot-long streaks of icy light shot out and struck the huge sword. The streaks of white light met the sword in a series of loud bangs. The impact of the strikes caused both the huge sword and the woman to recoil. The icy woman retreated about 10 meters before coming to a stop. The huge azure sword dimmed and diverged into several tens of flying swords that began to circle in place. Gradually, a silhouette appeared from within the revolving swords, revealing a youth with a common appearance. He gazed at the woman with a faint smile. When the woman clearly saw Han Li's true cultivation, her pupils shrank. "What is going on?" she demanded coldly. "Junior Marshal Sister Nangong, who is he and what was that doppelganger viewer?" The woman immediately reached at her waist and took out a red command medallion. Han Li shifted his gaze towards the command medallion, and sullenly said, "The restriction medallion." With a cold snort, she hastily said, "As expected, Junior Marshal Nangong has told you everything. I don't know who you are, but these matters are the affairs of the masked moon sect. You had best stand down, or our 6 sects will hunt you down." Having already placed away the silver sword from before, she gracefully stood up. "There is no need for Senior Marshal Sister to speak such frightening words," Nangong Wen said coldly. "I am not without friends in the 6 sects. If they knew what Senior Marshal Sister did to a fellow sect member, would you receive the blade? And while you are able to activate the heart restriction technique with that command medallion, do you believe that I will give you the opportunity to use it?" Soon after, Nangong Wen spat out a ring of flame, her magic treasure the vermilion bird band. A sinister glint flickered from the icy woman's eyes when she heard this. She had no intention of retreating against Han Li and wore a resentful expression on her face. She suddenly shook her sleeves, and tossed out a streak of white and black light, 2 flying swords. They revolved once around her and suddenly grew in size, extending to 3 meters in length. The white flying sword was as pure as snow and emitted a bone-chilling icy chi. As for the black flying sword, it possessed a fantastical heat and occasionally flickered with black flame. There were a rare pair of yin-yang swords. The woman coldly laughed and lightly shook the red command medallion in her head and muttered a few words into it. Red light immediately flickered from it, slowly covering it in a layer of light. Closely observing her actions, Han Li instantly attempted to interrupt her without another thought. A small silver bell had already begun to revolve around his head. Under the command of an incantation gesture, the bell began to ring, striking at her with silver sound waves. At nearly the same time, Han Li rolled his hands together, sending a streak of red and a streak of azure light towards some nearby pillars in the hall. As the hall's restrictions were activated, the ground trembled. Chapter 718. The Light Stasis Mirror. Chapter 718. The light stasis mirror. Threads of red and azure lights began to emerge from all over the hall and followed after the silver sound waves, engulfing the icy woman at their center. In the face of these oncoming attacks, the woman simply pointed to her two swords. Black and white light flashed from the swords as they easily spun once in the air, instantly releasing a wave of glacial and scorching chi. With the white icy chi on the outside, and the black scorching chi on the inside, they conformed into a strange barrier of light around the woman. When the sound waves struck the barrier, they were entirely absorbed without a trace. But soon after, the red and azure lights from the hall's restrictions managed to envelop the barrier. Nangong Wan took action at that moment. In a burst of flame, the vermilion bird band turned into a huge fireball and suddenly exuded a vast pressure. Then, with a casual wave of hand, a dim scarlet light flashed from her hand and she vanished from sight. Were it not for Han Li's vast spiritual sense, he wouldn't have been seen through Nangong Wan's sneak attack. Following a muffled hum, the dim light suddenly revealed it in a colorful burst. "To think that you would use a devil-slaying thorn to injure me!" she cried, her face contorted with a mixture of fury and alarm. "Well done. I had always thought that Junior Martial Sister had used all of them. I hadn't expected that you managed to preserve one." The woman appeared to have somehow suffered a heavy blow, but her vitality still held strong. Han Li knew that she had merely suffered a minor injury and that Nangong Wan simply intended to interrupt the icy woman's use of the restriction medallion. After Han Li activated the restrictions in the hall, he flipped his hand and the pitch-black thousand-layer mountain in his hand. He tossed it into the air and quickly struck the mountain with quickly formed spell seals. Appearing momentarily trapped by the restrictions, the vermilion bird band shot towards the icy woman as a ball of flames. But in that instant, 8 ferocious arm-thick flame pythons became entangled with it. A roaring sea of flames soon appeared in the hall. At that point, the mountain had expanded to 20 meters in height. Just as Han Li was about to command the treasure, he saw a bowl-thick beam of rainbow light shoot out from the sea of flames. Be it flame or light, anything that was struck by the beam of light was unable to resist it. A series of clanks suddenly rang out, and the beam of light abruptly stopped on the spiraling vermilion band ring, completely locking it down. The light stasis mirror. Han Li narrowed his eyes with a solemn expression. Before the woman arrived, Nangong Wan gave Han Li a general explanation of her senior martial sister's techniques and treasures to Han Li, allowing more opportunities for Han Li to strike her. The light stasis mirror was the ancient treasure that Nangong Wan had mentioned the most amongst her senior martial sister's treasures. It was also among the most fantastical of them. The azure stasis mirror that Han Li saw during the trial by blood and fire was most likely a replica of this ancient treasure. Although it only possessed 1/100th of its power, the magic tool was still renowned amongst low-grade cultivators as a magic tool that was amongst the best. The azure restrictions and the flames had been thrown into chaos by the light beam's overwhelming power, rendering them completely ineffective. As a result, the icy woman reappeared once more. Within her black-white barriers, she held a mirror in one hand and formed an incantation gesture with the other. Han Li's gaze flickered and fell onto the famous mirror that was in her hand. The mirror wasn't large and appeared the same as the azure stasis mirror. However, its body shone with a pitch-black light that left a deeply eerie impression on those who saw it. As for the rainbow beam of light that it emitted, it created such a harsh contrast it made for a bizarre sight. The hand that formed an incantation gesture was blood-stained, and the restriction medallion that it originally held had disappeared without a trace. It was truly unfathomable how she was injured through the barrier. This devil-slaying thorn is quite effective. With Nangong Wan's bonded magic treasure restrained by the mirror, Han Li wasn't about to idly stand by. He silently pointed to the black mountain, and had it disappear with a faint tremble. A short moment later, it reappeared above the icy woman and began to fall with tremendous momentum. The woman scoffed and slightly adjusted the direction of her light stasis mirror while striking it with a spell seal from her free hand. Suddenly, the existing beam of light faintly trembled and a slimmer branching beam shot out from the mirror towards the black mountain. Surpassing the speed of sound, the beam pierced through the air in an attempt to restrain the falling black mountain. Already prepared that he wouldn't be able to easily succeed, He clutched his hands together in an incantation gesture without further thought. The falling black mountain suddenly stopped in the air and revolved once before expelling a large cloud of black light from underneath it, just in time to interrupt the beam of light before it struck. The black cloud of light engulfed the beam of rainbow light as soon as it had appeared, flowed down to strike the icy woman's barrier. The black layer of the barrier trembled and began to throw her body's spiritual chi into disarray, nearly causing the beams of light from the mirror to scatter. The woman's silhouette grew dim from behind the barrier of light and her expression faintly changed. She opened her mouth and spat out a mist of azure chi onto the mirror without further thought. With the reinforced power, the rainbow light dissipated into a mist and stopped the black mountain and its aura from descending further. The confrontation between the two forces eventually resulted in a series of muffled explosions. Nangongwan's spirits were roused by the sight of the deadlock, and she suddenly willed the restricted vermilion bird ring to vastly fluctuate in size. It screamed with phoenix cries as it attempted its utmost to break free. For a time, the two joined hands to withstand Nangongwan's senior martial sister. Of course, the three weren't simply maintaining this deadlock, they were also observing each other's actions. Han Li was the first to move, slapping at his waist and summoning a spirit beast pouch. With a loud buzz, countless sparkling golden beetles surged through the air and formed a malevolent golden cloud. Nangong followed by uttering an incantation in the cadence of an otherworldly song. A huge scarlet barrier suddenly appeared a meter above her head. The barrier glowed with fluid light that gradually grew intensively bright. The icy woman suddenly tossed the mirror in her hand above her and slapped her hands together, summoning a small triangular flag into her grasp. Despite her preparations, she still gloomily said, "Divine Incarnation Light. Junior Marshal Nangong, you truly aren't holding back. You dare to use this." Although she found the golden insect swarm to be somewhat strange, she paid them little heed. She was clearly unfamiliar with the gold-devouring beetles. Wearing a faint smile on her face, Nangong said, "If Senior Marshal Sister doesn't wish to fight with her life on the line, then hand over the Contraining Heart Restriction Medallion and leave us be." The icy woman snorted and malicious intent appeared on her face. She then opened her mouth and spat out a small blood-red sword. The sword was only several inches long, but its body glistened with blinding red light and a thread of black chi faintly wandered around the sword's body. As soon as the sword appeared, the sword began to tremble of its own volition, filling the air in the hall with the scent of blood. The smile disappeared from Nangongwan's face with the appearance of the small crimson sword, and she icily stared at her senior martial sister. "Blood Devil Sword. Since when did you acquire that evil treasure? Are you not scared of the devilish chi backlash?" "Backlash? Have no worry. With this artifact, I will defeat you so quickly there won't be any opportunity for any devilish chi backlash. But now, I will ask you one last time. Are you truly unwilling to marry Wei Lycan for the prosperity of the sect? If you are still unwilling, I will have the Blood Devil Sword go mad. I am not entirely confident of my ability to restrain its power. Do not blame me for not warning you." The icy woman's voice was brimming with certainty. Han Li glanced at the Blood Devil saber without much care and calmly said, "There is no need for you to ask any questions. Even if Wanna was willing to sacrifice herself for the Masked Moon sect, I would not allow it. You will cease this foolishness." "And who are you? It seems your cultivation and abilities aren't weak, but I don't recall a nascent soul that compares with your description. Could it be you are a newly ascended nascent soul cultivator? But to call her in such a sappy manner as Wanna, you must have been the reason she had been unwilling to marry Wei Lycan all along." With a cold glint shining for her eyes, Nangongwan's senior martial sister stared at Han Li with murderous intent. Chapter 719. Blood Devil Sword. Han Li responded to Nangongwan's senior martial sister with an unhurried tone. "It doesn't matter who I am, but it does matter why you are being so obstinate. Just give the Contraining Heart Restriction Medallion to us and we'll immediately release you. As for the Blood Devil Sword, I have nothing to fear from it despite not knowing of it. It would be best if you didn't rely on it." The icy woman sinisterly stared at Han Li and curled her lips. You are overestimating yourself. If you knew about Blood Devil Sword, you wouldn't dare to speak so boldly. I'll kill you first and see if Junior Marshal Sister Nangong changes her mind." Immediately after, she bit the tip of her tongue and puffed a large mist of blood essence onto the small crimson sword and clutched her hands in an incantation seal. In a bright flash of crimson light, the small sword grew to a meter in length, flourishing its wicked, bloody appearance. The scent of blood it emitted became all the more repugnant and pervasive as well. The icy woman then grabbed onto the sword's handle without much care, and she began to glare with brilliantly light as she began to pour the entirety of her spiritual power into the crimson sword. "Quickly act. We cannot allow her to attack first." Unable to retain her calm, Nangong Wan shouted fearfully to Han Li. She knew much about the fissomeness of the Blood Devil Sword and couldn't hold much confidence in Han Li's words. Before she could finish condensing her divine incarnation light, she pointed to the huge barrier of light above her head. The dome of light trembled and began to quickly revolve. A short moment later, a gorgeous emerald green light flew out towards the icy woman in an instant. When the icy woman saw this, she casually waved her hand and tossed out the triangular flag. When the flag left her hand, it turned into a large cloud of eerie green fog as it intercepted the attack. As soon as the ray of emerald light struck the green fog, a flood dragon suddenly appeared from the emerald light. The flood dragon suddenly gained the upper hand in the struggle and surged through the fog in an attempt to disperse it. But like a tenacious disease, a layer of the fog stuck onto the flood dragon and prevented it from breaking free. Nangong Wan grimaced at the sight, and the icy woman revealed a trace of joy. The icy woman then swept the air with the crimson sword and slashed the sword over Han Li's head. A spatial fluctuation soon followed, carrying a 3-meter-wide wave of sword chi towards him. The sword chi was scarlet red and flaunted an ominous, evil aura as it cut forward without restraint. After the icy woman consumed a majority of her power in her attack, her complexion increasingly reddened several times in the following instant. Then in a flash of light, the crimson sword returned to its original small size. As the sword chi traveled through the air, the nearby spiritual chi flowed forward with the force of 1,000 streams, dragging the blood sword chi forward and concealing it. Han Li could only feel his body tense and suddenly felt his body shackled. Let alone cast any techniques, he couldn't even bring himself to move a single finger. He could only stare at the sword chi as it slowly made his way towards him. Nangong Wan's complexion turned deathly pale at the sight of this, and her senior martial sister simply smirked. Both of them believing that Han Li was about to meet great catastrophe, Han Li simply took a deep breath as he stared at the blood sword chi. With ringing thunder and wildly flickering golden light, a net of faint gold lightning appeared around Han Li. The icy woman was stunned at the sight. Before she could even react, the blood sword chi struck the net of lightning. A huge explosion sounded out as the divine lightning and the blood chi collided. Despite overbearing sword chi savage attempts to break through the golden net, it was incapable of severing the thin strands of lightning. Instead, the golden net gradually wrapped around it as if it were a fish. Then, the net of divine devilbane lightning around Han Li disappeared as it quickly moved to wrap around the sword chi. Han Li glanced at the lightning-restrained sword chi in the air with a trace of astonishment. The divine devilbane lightning appeared to be quickly consumed in its struggle to contain the sword chi despite its evil warding properties. Had he not released a third of his lightning reserves, it was quite possible he wouldn't have been able to restrain this wicked sword chi. Actually, this was the first time he had even encountered an evil devil Dao treasure that he hadn't been able to easily subdue with the devilbane lightning. But if this continued, both the blood sword chi and the devilbane lightning would likely both scatter. This wasn't something that he was going to allow. With that thought, Han Li raised his hands with a sullen expression, violently releasing 2 extremely dense bolts of lightning onto the net of lightning that was already restraining the crimson sword chi. With the reinforced vigor, the golden lightning was able to defeat the sword chi, leaving only a small cloud of crimson mist in the air. Without any further thought, Han Li pointed to the golden lightning in the air, and had it completely encase and condense the golden mist into a golden fist-sized ball. After it fell into his grasp, he expressionlessly glanced at the woman across from him. The scene had left the icy woman completely dumbstruck with completely disbelief on her face. Nangong Wan was also shocked to the point where her mouth was slightly hanging open. Seeing the full force of the blood devil sword rendered ineffective was beyond belief for the 2 women. Ever since this sword made its appearance in the heavenly south, it was unknown whether or not it was an ancient or a magic treasure. This sword was similar to an ordinary magic treasure by which it can be kept within one's body, but it was incapable of refined by an owner like an ancient treasure. Despite this, it was still capable of displaying astonishing strength. Unless one avoided the sword's spatial slash ahead of time, there was no method of blocking it. Any techniques or magic treasures used to block the attack would most likely be cleaved into two. As for the sword's user, unless they used a large amount of blood essence and vitality to activate it, they would have to be wary of devilish chi backlash. This was because the body's true essence became increasingly tainted by devilish essence the longer the sword was used. If too much devilish essence was accumulated, one would experience devilish chi backlash. They would lose any rationality and transform into a raging devil until their death. There are only a few of these devilish artifacts in the entirety of the heavenly south. It could be said to be a name that was both feared and admired. Just after Han Li dispersed of the blood sword chi, he took action without waiting for the two women to recover from their shock. With a fierce whistle, he had the gold-devouring beetles swarming above him roar and flood the room as they charged towards the icy woman. Han Li's had awakened the icy woman from her stupor. In furious alarm, she opened her mouth and spat out a small silver sword from her mouth and quickly formed an incantation gesture with her hands. The silver sword brilliantly shined and created a barrier of blinding silver light. With a sudden pop, the silver sword trembled and shot out over 1,000 strands of silver light towards the incoming swarm of golden beetles from within the barrier. Sword condensed threads. Han Li muttered to himself with a frown. So it turned out that Nangong Wan's senior martial sister was originally a sword cultivator. It was no wonder why she had so many sword-type magic treasures. In the following moment, the silver threads struck the golden insect cloud. With a loud burst of crackles, countless golden shells fell from the sky, thinning out much of the swarm. Holes were left in the cloud of beetles from where the silver sword threads had struck. Han Li's heart sank at the sight. Were his current gold-devouring beetles still incapable of contending against nascent soul cultivators? He had spent such meticulous time and effort to develop them. The icy woman felt relief at the result of the strike. With several more waves of attacks, the entire swarm of these odd insects should be fully exterminated. It appeared there was nothing to fear from them. However, Han Li's disappointment was soon replaced with joy. The beetles that had fallen from the strike had begun to move once more. With a shriek, they began to fly once more and followed the rest of the beetles towards the icy woman. At that moment, a phoenix cry suddenly sounded out from the green fog, and a radiance of 1,000 suns suddenly shined and cleanly scattered it away to reveal of 1,000,000 moon from within it. The moon shimmered with light before rushing towards the icy woman's barrier. The icy woman's expression vastly changed. Suddenly, the light barrier began to spin around her and her body transformed into a streak of black-white light as she attempted to escape from the hall. After this exchange, the woman finally realized that it would be extremely difficult to take on Han Li and Nangong Wan together. As such, she decided to flee the cave residence and restrain the two once she gathered reinforcements. While Han Li and Nangong Wan were particularly formidable, they couldn't stand up to the countless disciples of the Masked Moon sect. And once she arrived outside, she'd be able to activate the Masked Moon sect's sect guarding formations and trap the two inside. Chapter 720. Another Ring. Nangong Wan's Scarlet Moon was lagging behind in its attempt to chase her senior martial sister, granting her senior martial sister the opportunity to fly towards the ceiling and strike it. With a muffled thump, a red light pulsed from the ceiling, but it was unbroken. Only a few loose pieces of rock had fallen down. The icy woman was stunned. Before she realized what had happened, the roof flashed with light and swarms of black, gold, and silver beetles emerged from it. Buzzing, they quickly gathered at the room's center and formed a tricolored shield. In the icy woman's alarm, she waved her hand without any further thought, summoning a silver talisman in between her fingers. When Nangong Wan saw this, she naturally knew what her senior martial sister planned to do. Her expression immediately sank and slapped her storage pouch rather than using the divine incarnation light. A small red flag appeared in her hand and she immediately flung it into the ground. The icy woman waved her hand and activated the talisman in her hand. The talisman flew from her hand, enveloped in a ball of yellow light, and streaked towards the ceiling like a shooting star. The yellow light broke through the huge shield as if nothing had been there and directly flew towards the hall's ceiling. But at that same moment, Nangong Wan had finished uttering an incantation and activated the hidden restrictions in her cave residence. The entire hall began to glow with a red light, surrounding all the surfaces in a barrier of blinding light, the ceiling included. As if a nemesis of the icy woman's shooting star, the shooting star immediately stopped moving once it struck the light barrier as if sealed onto it. A large expanse of red light then gathered and wrapped around it. Nangong Wan's senior martial sister was astonished by this sudden change, but as a greatly experienced cultivator, she immediately realized what restriction this was. She immediately flicked her finger with a sullen expression, launching a bone-chillingly cold white sword streak from her hand. It circled once around the enveloped talisman and quickly scattered the red light that imprisoned it. The icy woman was delighted by the result. In a flash of yellow light, she immediately flew towards the ceiling through the opening of the scattered red light. But as soon as she arrived halfway through the opening, purple light suddenly flashed before her. Something suddenly enveloped her and forcefully dragged her away from hall's ceiling. With a light chuckle, a white silhouette appeared in a blur, revealing a white-clothed young woman. Silver Moon had suddenly appeared from the ceiling and was grasping a translucent purple thread in her hand. The other end of the purple thread led directly towards the icy woman's body. At that moment, Nanlong Wan's senior martial sister discovered that her body was enveloped in a net of sparkling purple thread. The thread was nearly invisible to the eye. In the icy woman's furious alarm, she flicked her fingers without any further thought, shooting over 10 streaks of black-white sword chi. Soon after, she followed up by spitting out a dense green flame from her mouth onto the purple net. Purple light flourished from the net. But regardless of whether it be the green flame or the black-white sword chi, they were incapable of harming the purple thread in the slightest. The icy woman became truly flustered by the sight. Just as she resolved herself to consume a great amount of vitality to employ a secret technique, Silver Moon smiled and pulled on the purple thread, uttering the word, "Restrain." The originally loose net immediately tightened and completely fettered the icy woman, completely preventing her from making even the slightest movement. The woman's face grew blood red. Ever since she condensed a nascent soul, she had always been looked up to with respect. She had never been caught in a situation such as this one, especially ever since she entered mid-nascent soul stage. With shameful fury, a cold glint appeared in her eyes as her entire body magnificently shined with light. In a moment, the light violently surged to double its size and began to faintly contain a faint tinge of crimson. When Silver Moon saw this, her smile disappeared and she knew things wouldn't end well. But just as she commanded the purple cloud lace to release all of its Jade Sun True Fire, Nangong Wa sent her a voice transmission. "Do not harm her. Leave her to me." As soon as she said this, her vermilion moon flew up from below and enveloped the icy woman within it. The moon hurriedly revolved and it soon began to ripple, filling the hall with silhouettes of itself. As Han Li stared at the twirling moon from down below, he was shocked to find his mind completely shaken and his focus broken. It was no wonder why the icy woman felt so fearful towards Nangong Wan's divine incarnation light. After the moon revolved for the time it took to finish a cup of tea, Nangong Wan finally stopped, her face pale from exhaustion. Then with a wave of her hand, the vermilion moon scattered into starlight with a light bang. Her senior martial sister reappeared from within it as she floated in the air, still restrained by the purple cloud lace. However, the spiritual chi in her body grew completely calm and she remained unconscious with a strange smile on her face. "What's this?" Han Li bewilderedly said. With a bit of color returned to her face, Nangong Wan smiled. "Those trapped by my divine incarnation light are incapable of escaping it, even if they manifest their nascent soul. This technique also possesses an incredibly powerful bewitchment effect. My senior martial sister's mind had been lost to the divine light for a time being. This way, we are able to spare her." Han Li rubbed his nose and helplessly said, "It was no surprise your senior martial sister was so fearful of it. It is able to prevent even a nascent soul from manifesting. However, there would have been no need to go through such troublesome methods if we didn't need to keep her alive. Lethal methods would have been far easier." Nangong Wan sighed and forced a smile. exterminating my senior martial sister, the sect's Grand Elder, is unacceptable. Since I plan on following you, the Masked Moon sect will already suffer a blow to its strength. If we kill her as well, the sect will become crippled. The past Masked Moon sect Grand Elder had treated me with great kindness. Although I cannot sacrifice myself for the sect, I cannot bring myself to doom it to extinction. Han Li wryly smiled and said, but your senior martial sister sure didn't treat you leniently when she attacked you and restricted you. That doesn't matter. Since I've spared her life, I can consider the debt to the sect's previous master repaid. I won't feel uneasy later when I've left with you. However, the last battle was truly dangerous. I truly didn't know that senior martial sister had a heaven-defying devilish artifact such as the Blood Devil Sword. It nearly led to a disastrous outcome. Had I known of this earlier, Nangong Wn brightly flickered and she wore an apologetic expression. However, Han Li simply smiled and showed not the slightest concern of it. It's nothing. Wasn't the Blood Devil Sword incapable of harming me either way? Anyhow, let's quickly acquire the restriction medallion and leave. Nangong Wan nodded her head in response. Silver Moon obediently shook her hand and unraveled the purple cloud lace from the icy woman. Nangong Wan took several steps forward and bluntly tapped several places on her senior martial sister's body, placing several restrictions on top of it. She then reached out for the dark green storage pouch at her waist and gently shook it open. Then in a bright flash of light, a pile of items appeared on the floor. When Han Li saw this, he curiously walked over. The heart-constraining restriction medallion was quite easy to find. Nangong Wan quickly took it into her hands with a smile. As for Han Li, he quickly swept his gaze past the pile and suddenly beckoned a small exquisite ring into his hands. It was completely dark and lightless. Han Li frowned and brought the item to his eye and began to examine it. Nangong Wan astonishedly said, "What are you doing with that? It looks like just an ordinary magic tool." Han Li chuckled and suddenly slapped his storage pouch, summoning a jade box into his hands. The box then opened in a flash of azure light, revealing an identical jet-black ring. Yee! Nangong Wan couldn't help but yelp in surprise. Han Li brought the two rings together and felt that they both possess a similar absence of qi. He then placed both of the rings back in the box before placing it into his storage pouch. Nangong Wan sweetly smiled and said nothing else as her mind began to wander. Then paying no further attention to the large pile of items, she walked towards her senior martial sister. With a flash of red light glowing from her hand, Nangong Wan nimbly touched her senior martial sister's head before closing her eyes in silence. When Han Li saw this, he silently walked over with a faint smile on his face. A short moment later, Nangong Wan opened her eyes and raised her hand, revealing the Blood Devil Sword in her grasp. Nangong Wan glanced at the sword for only a moment before tossing the devilish artifact to Han Li. This devilish artifact is mighty and proves to be a great threat against us, so it would be best to take it with us. While I am incapable of using this item, you are able to restrain this treasure with your golden lightning. Let's leave it in your hands.